I have to say for me, because I asked you earlier about what the best argument against God or the best evidence against God. For me, it's been the problem of divine hiddenness. The problem of evil
Mhm.
is definitely a strong one. I know that for most people, that's the strongest one. But for
Mhm.
me, I've had times in my life where I've just been like, God, where are you? And then I know that
Mhm.
those, Richard Dawkins and Alex O'Connor, I've heard them bring up this idea of like, well, people all over the world are born in different countries and they never even hear about Jesus. And so if Jesus is God, why would he not want those people to know who he is? And so for me, um, divine hiddenness has always been the hardest one for me to grapple
Mhm.
with. And I think on your channel, you've done a lot of great work on divine hiddenness. And so I wanted to ask
Mhm.
you, like, what do you think are the best responses to the problem of divine hiddenness?
Well, actually, what's sort of ironic about that is I'm literally working on a defense right now in dialogue with Justin Schieber of Real A Theology.
Mm,
So we're currently going back and forth just in written form, and then we're going to eventually go on a channel and read our debate.
mm,
But the defense that I'm developing is called the Holiness defense. So this idea comes from the work of Mark Murphy and his book Divine Action and Divine Holiness. And Mark Murphy points out after he develops his view of holiness, he notices that the default position, if we're accounting for God as holy, is that God would maintain distance because God, part of his holiness is that God is majestic, God is wholly other, God is transcendent, God is awesome, amazing. And then the other part of holiness is moral purity. So God is undefiled, God is totally pure. So if you think about us, we're not majestic. We're very limited in power and abilities. And then we're sinful. We're prone to all sorts of bad stuff.
mhm,
So for God to enter into an intimate relationship, and that's what's on the table with the hiddenness argument, is a personal relationship. Schellenberg talks about a conscious, reciprocal, meaningful relationship. For God to enter into that, it seems God has reasons that require him to keep distant, right?
mm,
Um, so that's just part of it. So God has a requiring reason that is a reason that, on pain of irrationality, he should sort of heed. That is, were he to enter into a personal relationship with us without a good reason to the contrary, he would be acting irrational given his holiness.
mm.
So this sort of flips the script on the argument, because the argument is that if God exists, God is all loving. If God is all loving, God's always open to a personal relationship with any person at any time. And so, if that's the case, there won't be people who really want to know God, really want a relationship with God, and yet don't believe he exists. You won't find those non-resistant non-believers. And this says no, God will actually, it makes sense that there would be non-resistant non-believers given that God is holy. And then I also pair that with love. So I do think love and holiness are a package.
Yeah.
Um, but that's at least one defense that I'm working on that I think is pretty powerful, and it hasn't really been explored much.
Yeah, that's probably, first of all, I want to say that's really good. But second of all, I think that that's so far from what I've seen from Schellenberg and others, that's probably my favorite route to go as well, is to say, okay, well, if we just analyze God's love, then yeah, it seems kind of puzzling. But once you bring in other attributes like holiness and transcendence and other things, it starts to make a little bit more sense. And so to me, it seems like the biggest error of the divine hiddenness argument is that it wants to kind of isolate God's love in a vacuum and then
Yes. Yeah.
to the exclusion of his other attributes. But it seems like we can't do that. It seems like we have to bring all of God for all that he is. And because it seems to me that if the divine hiddenness argument is going to work or show some sort of contradiction in God's nature and divine hiddenness, then it seems like you need to analyze all of God, not just one attribute.
Yeah, that's very perceptive. And there's a way I didn't mention, but prior to this, I say Schellenberg's committed to this
Mm,
because he thinks that God is the ultimate being. And how is God ultimate? God is metaphysically ultimate in terms of power and existence, ontology. God is axiologically ultimate. God is the ultimate source of value and goodness. And God is soteriologically ultimate. That is, God is the ultimate source of, you think of salvation, he's thinking of it like source of personal sort of fulfillment, and a savior can also give that to us. So I basically say, look, if this is your view of God, then you have to accept that God's holy, because part of God being axiologically ultimate is being morally pure, morally undefiled, and part of being metaphysically ultimate is being majestic and transcendent. So
Mhm.
I tied it even more to Schellenberg, say he's committed to this as well. But your general point is definitely, that's my motivation. I think we need to think about all of God. And if we
Yeah.
just isolate a particular attribute and say, this is what defines God, or in this particular way, or in this particular thing, then of course you're going to get out of it what you want, right?
Hmm.
And I'm not saying people are going into it thinking that, but if you just have this focus on love to the exclusion of God's other attributes, then it does make sense that you would think non-resistant non-believers is a reason to think God doesn't exist, as opposed
Yeah.
to, well, non-resistant non-believers is just sort of to be expected given that God's holy.
Mm. Oh yeah, and I did want to mention one thing. You said that you're working on this in a back and forth between you and what was his name one more time?
Justin Schieber.
Justin Schieber from Relay Theology. I really recommend anyone watching this to also check out Relay Theology. I think their
Oh yeah.
content is really good. Um, and I actually have been watching this back and forth between you and him. And one of the responses you gave in one of your videos, you'll probably remember this. It was, you said that God doesn't just want us to be in relationship with him. He wants us to have he doesn't just want us to know that he exists. He wants us to be in relationship with him. And so there might be some people, and some will even openly admit this, that if God revealed himself to them right now, they still wouldn't worship him. And so God is justified in not revealing himself or making himself known to someone if they're not prepared to worship him and be in right relationship with him if he were to make himself known. And so, because I think a lot of the argument as well is this idea that, oh, well, I don't believe that God exists. And if I don't believe God exists, then how could I possibly come into a relationship with him? And I
Mhm.
think one of your responses to that I thought was very, very sharp there, where you said, God doesn't just want us to know he exists. He wants us to worship him. And if someone's heart isn't prepared to worship him, then it might be better, actually. It might even be more loving of God to not reveal a knowledge of himself in this moment to that kind of person.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the better start objection. And the idea is like, if God's really all loving, then why wouldn't God, in some cases, wait for the person to come around so they're in a better position to enter into the relationship for the right reasons?
Yeah.
So if were he to reveal himself, his existence, then yeah, I guess on some level, now you're starting a personal relationship. But wouldn't it be better if God waited to reveal his existence to that person until they were perhaps had a softer heart, or they were ready to, as you mentioned, worship God and accept God for all of who God is and what God has done for them, as opposed to just like, yeah, we're kind of in a relationship, and Sheber's point is just get the relationship started because it's so valuable, and then you can God can sort of work on their heart and stuff like that. But relationships have a trajectory. That's another point that I make. And so if you start on a bad foot, um, God could do all sorts of things within the relationship, and it may or may not change their heart. So perhaps it would have been more loving in specific cases to wait until that heart was soft and ready, and then started on a better footing, and then also hopefully lead to a better trajectory as well.
Mm. No, that's really good. And I think I watched Gavin Ortland. He did a response to the divine hiddenness argument because, like I said, this has been the strongest argument for me against God. This is, like, to me, the most intuitionally troubling one for me over and above evil. But he said as well that sometimes that he gave this analogy between like a couple, like someone that you want to date, someone that you do, maybe you've fallen in love with them from a distance or something, and but maybe you know that they're not ready for a relationship. You know that they just got out of a bad relationship or something, and it might not be the loving thing to do to reveal that you have a desire to be in a loving relationship with them in that moment because of the situation they're going through. And so it's actually sometimes the loving thing to do to restrain and to make yourself known to them later and to make your feelings known to them later. And so I think a lot of these considerations can have helped me at least to deal with this intuitional pull I have with the divine hiddenness argument. Because when I first heard that argument, I was like, wow, that seems really plausible. It seems and like I said, I had dealt with moments in my life where I was like, where are you, God? You seem so hidden. So, and but the cool thing about that is, and this is something I loved about Ortland's treatment of it as well, is he went to Kierkegaard and to the Psalms, and we, like King David, had moments where he was like, where are you, God? And and then we have Soren Kierkegaard talking about how doubt and faith are like sisters. They're part of having a relationship with God is having doubt. It all comes with it. And so I think when we take all of these things into account, again, when we don't isolate like one thing and we kind of take the whole picture into account, these questions can be put to rest.
Yeah. And I think Schellenberg's argument is deductive. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, but there are other versions of the hiddenness argument that aren't quite as talked about, but are pretty strong. And so they're inductive. Stephen Mason gives a hiddenness argument from the idea that, like, and recently Cosmic Skeptic or Alex O'Connor put this on his channel. You look around the world and it's like, does God hate India? Does God hate Thailand? Because there's like Thailand, there's like, very small percentage of people who are monotheists. And then within that group, very small percentage of people who are Christians living in Thailand. So like you look around the globe and theistic belief is so unevenly distributed. Like, isn't that like a probabilistic argument? That isn't that evidence that God doesn't likely exist? Because were God to exist, God loves all people. So wouldn't theistic belief be more evenly distributed around the globe? So I just mentioned that because that's another sort of one that is still pretty tricky and Schellenberg's is still tricky. Don't get me wrong, and it deserves our full attention. But I just want to mention that there are these other versions as well that are not deductive arguments, but they're inductive arguments, and they can be pretty strong as well.